Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's Channel 4's Fake News Week, but just what is fake, what's a half-truth, and what is just good old-fashioned propaganda? Across the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, with their significant populations of ethnic Russians, numerous web-based portals have sprung up, pumping out what activists say is Russian propaganda, funded by Moscow. Our reporter Porrick O'Brien has been to the front line of the information war.
The ghosts of Soviet past stalk the streets of Estonia again. NATO troops line borders against emboldened Russia. And in these parts, the information battle lines have already been crossed. The old Viru Hotel, once KGB controlled, a Soviet symbol that screams information is power. The rooms and restaurants bugged to blackmail, heady days and nights recorded to compromise. We're going to the hotel's 23rd floor. That's right, the 23rd floor. The KGB control room, the switchboard for a network of tiny microphones. These old wires, the medium of Russian influence. Nowadays, the wires are fiber optic. Another hotel in Tallinn. We meet a member of the group Propostop, the new breed of information activist. He's asked for anonymity to avoid being targeted by Russian hackers. Our story starts with a Facebook post he wants to show us. It will end, he says, with the Kremlin.
The Facebook post tells the tale of a group of British troops with the NATO mission to Estonia. According to the post, the soldiers were rude to an elderly lady in a hospital waiting room in Tallinn. She didn't have a seat, they wouldn't give her theirs. At which point, our plucky storyteller confronts the troops and ends up with the following flurry in English. "I am an agent of Putin," she says, "and we are everywhere." The strange little tale was shared a few times with friends and then disappeared into the ether. Not so much.
It was, in fact, picked up by the Baltic states news portal Bolt News. It went viral. With hundreds of British troops en route to the Baltic states, the subtext of the story, NATO troops are not only coming to bully Mother Russia with tanks on the border, they're also coming to bully your granny. The problem with the Bolt News story. The MOD told us that when the article was published, there were only about 5 British military personnel in Tallinn, including a general and a handful of officials. Also, the original Facebook source has deleted the post, has not responded to our request for more detail, and is quoted in other similar type stories on Bolt News. This is one example. There are others, even some real news, on Bolt News. It popped up 2 years ago. Its Estonian office is here in an industrial estate in Tallinn.
So this is the office block where the registered offices of Bolt News / Alt Media are, and it's 205 is the number where it's registered, which is down here.
A sister company called Alt Media is also registered here.
Hello. How are you doing? Is this Bolt News? Is Mr. Kornilov in there?
Я не работаю в Альтмедиа.
You don't work for Alt Media. So why are you in their office?
Почему вы здесь?
У меня договоренность с Александром Корниловым.
Do you produce Russian propaganda here?
Ну, то есть, что такое, вот, вашим вниманием, пропаганда?
And are these, has the police been here?
Да.
Okay, that's what this tape is. I see.
The police were here for the boss, Alexander Kornilov.
Hello, is that Mr. Kornilov?
We've temporarily commandeered the old KGB control room to track him down. The man who runs Bolt News and Alt Media was arrested last year by police on suspicion of tax fraud. It's alleged that he didn't pay the requisite taxes on money his organisation received from Moscow. It's one of the ways the Estonian equivalent to MI5 is clamping down on what they call subversive Russian influences. The intelligence services here in no doubt about the endgame.
The goal is to make Russia great again, or make it superpower again.
We start with Bolt News and Alexander Kornilov.
He's pro-Kremlin activist. I wouldn't call him journalist.
Does he call himself a journalist?
Sure.
Is he?
They call themselves journalists, yeah. But they are coordinated from Russia and
How do you know they're coordinated from Russia?
this is I cannot go into details on that, but we know.
Is it money
Yeah, they get money, yeah?
from Moscow?
Yes.
Kornilov wouldn't do an interview on camera, but told us he's standing by his journalism and said the tax case against him was politically motivated. There's another layer to our story. For that, we travel south to Riga, Latvia. This is the NATO agency that monitors fake news. Yes, such a thing exists, and the UK is a contributing partner. We started with mechanics. Now for the big picture. A new trend, according to NATO, for Russian money to buy existing clickbait sites and bit by bit transform them.
That sort of clickbait business, they introduced the sentiments, the news.
So are you saying to me, Yanis, that pro-Russian businessmen are buying up entertainment websites and changing them into Russian propaganda organizations?
They've exposed themselves being part of the pro-Russian political forces.
A second trend, for Russian-funded think tanks in the West to basically launder fake news, to give it a veneer of academic credibility, a thin sheet of solid ice on top of the slush. So, it's sophisticated, and according to NATO, designed to drive a wedge, first between the ethnically Russian community and the Baltic states they live in, but ultimately to do the same to organizations like the EU.
You don't need tanks. You might actually achieve your goals if you change the perception patterns of a given society in a way that corresponds to your interests, and the society starts to act how you want them to act.
This is the NATO perspective, of course, and it's worth remembering that propaganda changes to news and vice versa, depending on your world view. Fake news is nothing new in the Baltic states. There's history here. Take the barricades in Riga in '91. The threat of Soviet aggression prompted thousands not only to surround government buildings, but also the radio and television stations. 7 people were killed, people who wanted to protect the independence of the narrative. In other words, they formed a human shield around, believe it or not, the mainstream media. For these people, fake news wasn't something you liked or disliked on Facebook. It was something worth laying your life on the line for to stop.
Joining us now to discuss fake news and trust in the media is the Washington Post columnist Anne Applebaum, who is launching a project with the London School of Economics which will investigate the spreading of untrue information. And from Los Angeles, we have the author Jared Kobek, who says that the mainstream media was guilty of reporting fake news in the run-up to the US elections by downplaying Trump's likelihood of winning. Anne Applebaum, you have experience and evidence of Russians creating articles to denigrate what you do.
Yes, I mean, I had a very small and not very important experience, which is that there was a series of articles written about me that sort of combined real facts and fake facts, and they were designed to imply that I was taking money from somebody to write anti-Russian articles. What was interesting about this wasn't the original articles, it was that then I became aware that there was a whole ecosystem of websites that had been set up in order to spread it. And you could follow the information from site to site. until eventually the original stories were retweeted by Julian Assange, by WikiLeaks. And this is a year and a half ago. So I understood that it was a part of it was a carefully constructed system, and that they used it to spread other pieces of fake information too. The information about me is not very important, but it was my understanding of how it works that led me to get interested in the whole subject.
Jarek Kobik, you wrote a novel, indeed a satirical one, in which you said, "I hate the internet," but I think you don't. But on the other hand, you aren't too friendly with the conventional media.
Yeah, well, I think the idea of fake news is predicated on the idea that there is real news. And I think I can only speak to a US context, but in the run-up to the election, you could look at websites like the Huffington Post or the website of the New York Times, and there was a completely distorted view of reality. And I think the question then becomes, why have we landed on fake news as an explanation for Trump's victory?
Sorry, this distorted view of reality, fill it out a bit.
Sure. I mean, just the idea of reporting on the election as if it was one election, one nationwide election, when it was 50 independent elections happening in all of the different states. The Huffington Post, I think, gave Trump a 2% chance of victory the night before he won. Every time some egregious detail about Trump became apparent, the New York Times would run how many think pieces, how much reporting about this idea that this was the thing that was finally going to disqualify him.
Okay, pause there for a moment. Let me just ask for your reaction, Anne Applebaum.
Well, there's a difference between media making a mistake and, for example, assuming that the popular result, which was, of course, for Hillary Clinton, was the same thing as the state-by-state result. And, of course, he's absolutely right that that was the wrong way to cover the election. But there's a difference between that and systematic spreading of untrue stories, which are demonstrably fake, through not only fake websites, but through using bots, using Twitter trolls and sort of huge trolling operations, which we know, for example, the Kremlin does. Of course, they're not the only ones who do it, in an attempt to give people a deliberately false picture of reality. So no, I don't think those are quite the same thing.
I mean, for example, Mr. Kobik, we had this extraordinary moment when 1 million people picked up the information that Pope Francis had endorsed Mr. Trump. It was simply untrue. It was fake.
I agree completely. I mean, there obviously is a difference between news that is, or quote unquote news that's broadly unfactual, and news that spins towards, news that has a certain spin on it for a certain audience.
Well, hang on a minute. You started this conversation by saying you didn't really believe fake news existed.
Well, I don't. I mean, the news all seems fake.
That was fake. Pope Francis hadn't even opened his mouth and certainly mentioned Trump by name. He hadn't done either.
How is that different than giving Trump a 2% chance of winning? Or I'm sorry, 2%. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, the point surely here is that actually, in any case, Trump did indeed not win the popular vote, as Anne Applebaum has already said, by 2.7 million votes. That's a pretty big margin.
It's a big margin, but it's irrelevant. He's in the office.
So what is your real point? The point is that it's not fake news, it's lying?
No, I think the point is that post-Trump's victory, and, I'm not a Trump supporter, but post-Trump's victory, there has been a continual cycling through of ideas to explain why this victory happened. And I think, fake news is the one that we've landed on. But there certainly were others.
So at the end of the day, you're convinced fake news exists. It has to be tackled. You're obviously setting up an institution to do it.
Yes. I mean, I think the phenomenon of 20th century disinformation propaganda, and I'm talking about deliberate campaigns designed to mislead people, do exist. They are real, and there are ways in which we can fight them, both actively and passively, both by teaching people how to recognize them and also beginning to understand better how fact-checking works and can be used. And I think that's a valuable thing to do.
Anne Applebaum, thank you very much. And Jarek Kobik in Los Angeles, thank you very much.